Hey guys, I'm Matt Reed. I'm youth pastor at Grace Community Church, and this is my friend Joel.
Joel Gill, Director of Student Ministries at the First Congregational Church of Ossipee, and so glad that we can be bringing you our thoughts on Philippians. As we're going through Philippians, Grace, you guys are going through Philippians, and so just going to be, I think it's just a really relevant and timely book for what we're going through with all our social distancing, quarantining, coronavirus extravaganza.
Yeah, and I think it's relevant and something that we can relate to because Paul's writing this from prison. So he's separated from his friends. He's writing to the church in Philippi. So he probably felt kind of like we feel right now when we're separated. Why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown of chapter 1? Because we're in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. But you've been reading ahead of us already.
Yeah, we started about a month ago going through chapter 1, and one of the things that really, well, a couple of things really stood out to me is, just Paul is really talking about unity for the gospel here. Like, he is really saying, despite whatever the circumstances are, it doesn't matter what the circumstances, no matter what we're facing, the struggles that we have. And Paul was facing struggles. He was facing opposition. The Philippians knew struggle and opposition. He's saying we need to be united for the gospel. Getting the gospel out, no matter what the reason is, no matter what the circumstance, getting the gospel out is, really the highest priority. And that's something he really rejoiced in. And the way that we get the gospel out, the most effective way we get that out is by being a united people under Christ. And so I think really that's my big takeaway from chapter 1.
And I think that kind of continues in chapter 2, because verse 2, it says, "Then make my joy complete by being like-minded." So it's continuing that thought. He has a couple other things he says before that, but then he just says, make it all complete by being like-minded together.
Yeah, and he starts in verse 1 talking about, hey, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ. So if we are united with Christ, if we know his love, if we have comfort from his love, if we have any tenderness and compassion, if we have common sharing in the Spirit, if we are united with Christ and we know Christ, that's going to overflow into the way that we live. And the way that we live is going to be united. Talking about do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Don't look to just your own interest, but look to the interest of others. And for myself, I can tell you I have a pretty big selfish streak. I look at my own needs and wants and desires over others. And that's not the way to unity. We're never going to be united when we're trying to look at ourselves. And I think situations and tough circumstances and struggle, sort of like what we're going through, can breed selfishness and just being inwardly focused. And so the more that we can put others above ourselves, I think the more united we're going to be, because the more we're going to be caring for each other as Christ calls us to.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for us to look at other people and how they're being selfish, but it's hard to look inward and to kind of evaluate that about ourselves. Maybe you guys are at home and that's kind of where the worst comes out in us, when we're stuck around our family or people that we're around all the time. The worst of in us kind of pops out, and it's easy for us to become selfish and act ways that we shouldn't act, that we might not act in public. Although, Joel, you were telling me this story that you read online about a guy who was acting selfishly in public.
Oh yeah. So there's a guy that I heard about. He and his wife went to the grocery store and they basically cleaned out the meat section. The meat coolers were emptied. They had 2 massive grocery carts full of meat for themselves, and people were just like looking at them and like nailed them. Like, how could you do this? People are struggling to get what they need, and you're just hoarding all this stuff for yourself. But it's so easy to look at other people and say, look at what you're doing, and then not look at like Matt was saying, not look at our own selves. And but the reality is, like, it starts with us. It starts with us. Are we putting others first? Are we looking to others' interests? And how are you doing that at home? I mean, Matt was talking about that. We're with the people that are closest to us, but how are we doing that? How are we doing that with our siblings, with our parents? Are we putting their interest and their needs before our own, or are we only looking to what we need? Quick example. I was staying up late to edit some video, and I was like, oh, Michelle, I just need to sleep in tomorrow, because I've been up late, and I'm like, but we have 3 kids. how selfish is that of me to say, well, just because I'm staying up late and Michelle's feeding, our youngest, all night. Well, not all night, but a lot of the night. And it's like, that was my selfishness coming through.
Yeah.
So it's easy for that to happen.
And we're taking our time to go through these verses. We're going to be going through this week, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, where I want you guys to read that same chapter, that same section every single day. We're going to put up questions. I'm going to put up some on the screen, and we'll probably post them in different areas for you guys to be able to access them. But answer those questions, read the same section every single day. And the first question is actually, what is one important verse one verse that really stands out to you, and why? So you could answer that question.
Well, the verse that, and not that we need to get into this too deep right now, but the verse that really stands out to me is jumping right down to verse 5, because I think this really encapsulates this whole thing.
Yeah.
In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And it's so we need to have that same mindset. That, and when we look down, we look at, he was a servant. He humbled himself. He became obedient to death on the cross. And I think there's nothing that God has called me to sacrifice for others that has gone as far as dying on a cross.
Yeah.
But that's the same mindset that I need to have. And when it's in my mind, that's where all our actions start out. So
yeah.
If it's here, it's going to flow out into, more likely to flow out into my life. And I also love the aspect that Paul really emphasizes in your relationships with one another, because there are no Lone Ranger Christians.
Yep.
We live out the commands of Christ and the things that Paul tells us to do here in Philippians. We live those out in the context of our relationships with other people. So it's not like we can, and that starts right where we're at. It's not just when we're at school or when we're at church or when we're in our bands or on sports teams or whatever. It's right now where we're at. And for us, that's with our families. And that starts here for all of us right now.
Yeah, my version says your attitude should be the same of Christ. So I think it's important that we check our own attitudes in that. So throughout the week, guys, just read through this, and every day pick one of those questions and contemplate it. You could journal about it, and we'll touch base with you. I'll touch base with you guys throughout the week, and Joel will probably touch base with his students, however he's connecting with them. And
we'll have videos up on Thursday, and we'll go from there.
All right.
Hey, guys, it's great sharing some thoughts with you, and hopefully we'll be able to connect soon.
Hopefully we'll see you next time.